Next up is Angel Steger, who leads growth design here at Dropbox. She spent over 10 years leading growth design teams at little companies you might have heard of, like Pinterest. Her passion is really around building tools that empower people. So please give me and join me in welcoming Angel to the stage. Thank you so much.
All right, hello. Well, it's quite loud. All right. Which one is forward?
Big one.
The green? Okay, let's try again. All right, cool. All right, so I'm going to talk about activating Dropbox business teams. So a little bit about growth. Our mission is to create long-term customers by helping people discover the value of Dropbox. Important thing, long-term. I'm not trying to trick people into shit. It's a relationship. And the other thing is that people discover the value of Dropbox. They are not learned. They get it and experience it for themselves. All right, so what is Dropbox Business? Is it a product for teams that enables them to have one organized place to store their files? This is what they told us they wanted, and that is what it is for. Why do we care about teams? They have inherent business advantages. One thing is one team creator creates multiple people in a team, which means that you have natural growth revenue from teams growing. And then the other thing is that the revenue is more stable, right? Like if one person leaves that team, the whole team doesn't fall apart, which is not true with individual customers. And then just a little bit about how we think about customer economics. Why do we say we want people to discover the value of our products is because if the cash money value that someone is putting into your service is less than the product value they're getting out of your service, you have a happy economic imbalance because they want to keep paying you because it's a good deal. Now, if the product value is not worth as much as the cash money value you're putting in, then you have a bad economic ratio, and therefore they will not continue to be a paying customer. Simple. All right, so, big hypothesis here. People pay for what they use and what they value. And if we can do a better job of getting teams using Dropbox, finding value as quickly as possible, then more of them will, one, choose to purchase, which is direct impact, and then two, will retain as happy paying customers in the long term, which is the indirect impact, both of which lead to money. So there's two kind of main metrics that we work with. One is the near-term metric, which was an activation metric, which roughly translates to a set of actions taken by healthy teams over a period of time. Not unique to any particular company, but the types of things that we might measure and the type of time period might vary. The other thing is we have an accountability metric, which is trial purchase conversion rate. So, if people have a trial and they activate, then hopefully they get the value and they convert. So that's kind of the bottom line measurement. When we think about it, we're like, well, we have this activation metric that is combined of a series of actions that are correlated to healthy, engaged teams. Perhaps if we guide those teams to taking those actions, maybe that will also cause them to activate. Correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation, but maybe, we'll see. Maybe one of them does. And then, so a little bit about the team makeup. So this was one of the teams that I managed, but fully staffed cross-functional team. They're all really excited. They got lots of ideas, and one of the things that they're kind of thinking about is where do we start? And sometimes you maybe have gone through this process when you're starting a really broad open field project. And one of the things that we do to kind of cut down on complexity when you're dealing with a lot of variables is to actually map the knowledge into a 4x4. So to kind of take a walk through it, kind of do a list of what are the known knowns? What do we already know about this whole situation with teams? Well, we know why they buy, we know what their usability issues are, we know how many active teams, et cetera. This is not by any means a complete list. And then, we have the known unknowns, which are things that we're curious about that we want to learn, either through experimentation or prototyping, what have you. And so some of the questions here are what might be the right onboarding UI for activating teams? What platform should they do? What should we drive people to? What's the right steps? And then there's unknown knowns, which are things that other people might know, hey, maybe there's some data somewhere, maybe there's some past research that we can dig up, get a little bit more handle on the issue. Things like, hey, what have we tried in the past? What do we know works, doesn't work? And then there's kind of this category of unknown unknowns, which, stuff nobody knows, but might surprise us one day. And the goal of organizing these ideas this way is so that, as we start to plan our experimentation, we can start to move things like across, into the known knowns, so that it becomes easier and easier to narrow in on exactly what kind of problem you're trying to solve. So here are some ones that kind of stood out to us. We know we have usability issues. We have some questions about the onboarding UI, platform, steps. And so, from those sets of questions, we start to organize them into what I call an experiment genealogy, which is what questions do you need to answer in what order, because you don't want to spend time polishing something that isn't valuable. So you kind of want to start with your rough cuts and then start with a chainsaw, move to a chisel. And so this is again kind of a abstracted version of this, but first thing well, on the low-hanging fruit side, we know we have usability issues. If we solve those usability issues, how much does that get us? What's the right choreography of steps? How do we talk to people in a way that makes sense for them? Where should they do those steps? And what's the right UI kind of expression of that? And then how do you get it even better? You wouldn't want to start with hyper-optimization. That's a bit weird. Okay, and then just a little thing about the way kind of we work on growth design is really just, when you think about design quality is a function of what you're trying to accomplish. It's not a look. And so we have this kind of decision tree, which, albeit is super tiny, basically ladders to these major questions here to kind of help us understand how to address quality. So, is this a problem we're solving? If not, don't even bother designing. Go back to the drawing board, find a problem we're solving. Is this design good enough to learn? Cool. Maybe you can take it to an experiment. Is it good enough to ship? Well, that might be need a little more polish. Could it be better? Would be making it better best? A good use of time? Is it a good thing to do? Does it make it easy or more stable in some way? So you're going to see some stuff that looks rough because we're in that good enough to learn category because we're trying to learn. So the first two problems that we kind of ticked off immediately was is usability the primary problem, and what is the right choreography of steps? The usability one we did through experimentation. The choreography of steps we did through user research, which is a really great thing to understand the what and the why. On the left here is the original experience, and to give you some context, you had just created an account, and you kind of land on this screen, and this screen has a blue thing at the bottom that tells you hey, here's some stuff, this is what you can do with it, but actually what it's talking about is this thing up here. And not surprisingly, not a lot of people were seeing that because you're they're looking at the interface and there's a thing kind of at their feet that's talking to them, but just don't see it. And so the first thing we did was actually just move the focus to the thing itself. Low-hanging fruit, like I'm saying. So that people can actually learn what they're looking at. Again, not anything crazy, no new paradigms. And then from talking to research, we kind of got the steps in the right order. So we learned okay, first of all, people want to organize their team's content first. So we're okay, start creating your folders. And then, now that you've created your folders, you can add people, because you don't invite people to an empty house, you invite them to your house that's decorated. And then we even tried things having sample folders to lower the barrier to creating. So these marketing projects, sales folders, clients, those are things that we would kind of pre-populate so that you'd have a sense of oh, here's an example of how to organize. All right, so summarizing the changes, users can see and understand the guide. Awesome. The steps are in the right order for their mental model. And we actually drove them to important behaviors for activation. So what happened? We increased the completion rate of onboarding by 250%. Hooray. But it didn't actually move the activation rate or TPCR. So what's missing? One of the things we realized is that users don't really experience our product, UI piece, or page by page, much in the same way that they don't experience a painting inch by inch. This is a great analogy given by the designer Emily who worked on this. You know, they experience your product as a whole, right? That little dot didn't really make a whole lot of sense. So the question then became, and this again was inserted into the genealogy as we learned, was how might we tell a clearer story and tie it back to value? Back. All right, so here's a video of how it would work. You'd get step 1, prompted, takes you on a tour of the space, kind of do your little tour. Basically what it is a series of steps that kind of explain what it is that you're trying to do, and they align to things that people have identified that they want to do. Moving on, aggressively trying to move on. All right, I'm gonna chill on the clicker, sorry. Thank you. All right, so what happened? By framing the narrative, we were able to increase activation by 8%, which, having worked in other companies on activation, this kind of a number is actually quite large. Yeah, usually it's like 1%, 2%, 3%. All right, so what do we learn? Narrative and framing are critical motivators. Why should I care? What's in it for me? I call it that, like, the cynical teenager test. You know, like, does it even matter anyway? Like, you got to answer that. All right, so then moving on from there, you know, well, okay, so we did these steps. Should they do the steps on the desktop or web or both? And we kind of did that and didn't really get a whole lot out of it. You know, just it made a difference, but not a big one. And then the thing that came to us was like, okay, so you know we've been doing a lot of optimization, but like more on the usability side and more on the framing side. And so one of the things that we started asking was like, well, what are the other barriers that really exist? And so when we looked at the team admin process, they kind of go on this journey of, you know, first, you know, they're like, all right, I got a problem. We need a centralized place to store our files. So they kind of like discuss trying it out with people. They sign up for a trial. They invite a trusted buddy to kind of test it out with them, because that's how you test out your team stuff. And then there's this critical part in the journey that's like setting up your team space, because, you know, you have this problem of like potentially chaos in your organization. You're looking for one organized place to store everything. And then you actually have this space to start doing it right for the first time. And so there's this like kind of emotional and cognitive hurdle, the blank page problem. And then later, you know, you kind of have to like explain to people like you have to kind of onboard your team, and then, you know, you invite people, et cetera. And then you get back to work, because that's actually what you really wanted to do in the first place, was like have the outcome. But there's this kind of like critical pink obstacle for people. And so one of the things that we wanted to think about was, okay, if having your content organized so that you felt confident bringing people into that space is a major barrier, like how do we reduce the cognitive load of getting stuff in there? And so one of the things that we looked at was, hey, you know what? There's a lot of people who are team creators who already have a Dropbox account. Like that's how they knew that they wanted Dropbox, was they already had it just for individuals. And so they've already got a folder structure there. Like they don't need to recreate it. They don't need to start from scratch. They can just port it over. And so what we did was put together a way for them to easily port over their folder structure, so they don't have to start from nothing. They can start from what they already have and improve it. So I'm just going to click through. So first, you know, you have these 3 steps, things that, you know, again, we want people to do. First thing, set up your workspace. So we're like, oh, okay, this is your workspace. You know, go ahead. People that you add to your team will have access to the space, any folders you put here. This is your personal folder, so like store your stuff there. It's a little private. And then you can like organize things for your teams. And this here we say like, hey, your existing Dropbox files from your personal account have been placed into your personal folder. To get started, move some of those folders that your team should have access to into the shared workspace. So it's a little like porter assist. So you open up the folder and you can click, okay, got my offsite picks, got the marketing and finance stuff. Like, I want my whole team on board with that. So you click next. We just kind of confirm that those are in fact going into the Acme workspace. And then little confirmation and celebratory thing. You did it. You set up your space. Now add some people. So outcomes. We increased activation by 11%, which is actually of the people, that's overall, not everyone who was a team creator had this situation. So it was like pretty good number. For people who already had personal accounts, this activation rate was more like an increase of 30%. And then, yeah, fucking real, right? And then lastly, the other thing is, again, because having the space set up increases your confidence in inviting people, right? That it also increased team invites by 5%, which again helps you get further to that last little piece of the journey of like, we're actually working as a team, shit's happening. So learning, why does this work? Well, teams require teammates. Team creators feel organized, they invite people. When you invite people, then you start working together. So it's disco up and to the right. In aggregate, through a series of these projects, we increased team activation overall by about 20%. Interesting twist. Remember we talked about activation, we talked about TPCR. It didn't actually lead to significant lift in TCPR, or TPCR. Or did it? So, actually, when we cut the data, which is one of those things where it's good to have data, but then you want to look at slices of it. One of the things that we realized was that for a subset of people that appeared very qualified, actually it did. And so we're like, okay, well, if it's working for some, but not for others, what's going on? And one of the things that we recognized was actually we have a top of the funnel issue where there are people who are not appropriate for a team's product getting into the team's experience. And so, similar to if you just had a random cat with a hat and a bow tie entering into your funnel, you can't activate a person who's not right for teams as a team. They're non-viable. And that actually was the thing that was creating noise to the data. But when you cleaned it up, you actually saw a little bit more signal that, maybe there is more here. The other thing that we did was we realized that the activation metric did not consider enough variables. And so we have a new metric called XR that looks at a much larger set of variables and including things that drive engagement. And then the other thing is key learning was that we're actually getting the most impact from reducing barriers to users feeling confident using the product. I think a lot of times when people talk about optimization, they think about friction, but friction in terms of mental model is real and is something that I think design has a unique opportunity to identify and capture and represent because, the analogy I use is like, say someone is interested in learning to ride a bicycle. And you're like, cool, I'm gonna teach you to ride a bicycle. My bicycle has you cycling face down. Yes, you can get them to do it, but it's not really what they expect. And so it's always gonna be a fight for them, and to convince them to even try it is gonna be like a hassle. And so rather than trying to use your onboarding flows to basically get people into something that has them cycling face down, understand, well, my expectation is that I would cycle upright, and then work to drive the product changes that basically are the equivalent of upright cycling. So in this case for us, team creators really risk credibility if they set up their team incorrectly. They're saying, hey, Dropbox can solve a problem, and the team's trusting on faith that it can, but they're putting their reputation out on the line too, And so making sure that they feel safe, they feel confident, that they really know exactly what's going on in the product, that's the thing that's gonna make the biggest difference. It's not about a number of steps. That's it, thanks all.